Welcome back to AFTV, everyone. Welcome to another live show here at 7 p.m. We are live every 7 p.m. But we've had some interesting financial reports from Arsenal, and we thought we'd go into it. But I don't want to lie to you all. I'm no expert when it comes to all this. I'm really, really not. So we invited Kieran Maguire, who has his own podcast, The Price of Football, as well as his own book, The Price of Football, Understanding Football Club Finance. Kieran, a big thank you on such short notice for joining us here on the live. How are you, mate? And thank you for joining us.
I'm all good. I'm a Brighton fan, so I'm still grinning from ear to ear after turning over Chelsea twice in a week, which I'm sure won't disappoint too many Arsenal fans.
Understandably, I tell you what, we all enjoyed that. That was I had no Valentine's Day plans, and it was fun watching that. So big thanks to Brighton. That was good fun. Look, we really appreciate you joining. To all the viewers, Robbie will be joining us later. He's listening in on all this, and we'll be giving our thoughts and probably somewhat unreasonable expectations as Arsenal fans for what we should do after these financial reports have been made public. I'm gonna just spit out a load of numbers that I read from a report. And Kieran, with your expertise, would love you to help us make sense of it all, because it's very easy from here on my armchair going, I would love Arsenal to spend 300 million because the squad needs it, blah blah blah. Football doesn't always work like that. So let me just quickly break down what I believe we've understood. Of course, cut me if there's anything I've got wrong, but my understanding from various articles and reports covering everything, so Arsenal made a loss of 17.7 million pounds, though that is down on last year's 52.1 million. PSR regulations state that clubs can't lose more than 105 million pounds over a 3-year period. It's just worth knowing that. Now, revenues are up from 466 million to 616. I'm rounding up the number in whole. It's actually 466.7, but you get the gist. With Champions League helping increase match day revenue to 131 million pounds, up from 102 million, and the Champions League also helping increase broadcast revenue to 262 million, up from the 191. Now, on the salary front as well, there's been a big increase, with the 234.8 million pounds from 2023 rising to 327 million pounds after big contracts are handed out and the likes of Rice and Havertz signing as well. Now, come next year, we'll be able to see the impact of the Nketiah, Ramsdale, Smith Rowe sales as well. We'll obviously know that there's contracts to expire, and then potentially any other sales from the summer. So apologies everyone who I've just absolutely word vomited a load of numbers at you all, but that's basically the situation. And of course, articles are out there breaking down the numbers if you want to see it on your screens. Kieran, again, a big thank you for joining us, because I think what we really want to understand first and foremost, is this a healthy report from Arsenal? Is this, I've seen you tweeting about it as well, is this good news essentially, first and foremost?
Yes, I think it's good news to start off with in terms of the money coming into the club. And all football clubs broadly generate money from three sources, which is your ticket sales, the commercial deals, and the broadcast deals. Now, in terms of the money coming through the terraces, it was significantly up. Now, that's partly due to being in the Champions League and therefore being able to charge Champions League prices. If you've got Denmark's third best team on a Thursday night, you've got to price accordingly. If you've got Champions League opponents, you can do better on the back of that. I think also, there has been small increases as far as ticket prices for regular fans are concerned. But what we're seeing increasingly is the likes of Arsenal and other clubs, they are targeting the corporate sector because they've got much bigger pockets, so they can cope with much bigger rises. And in the case of Arsenal, demand exceeds supply. So Arsenal are actually in a strong position there. So that was the first good thing. The big increase in broadcast money, as you rightly said, came through UEFA and participation in the Champions League. And I think the reason why this was really good for Arsenal is that we talk about the big six, and Arsenal, until about 2016-17, they were always at the top of the big six. They didn't necessarily have quite the brand appeal of Manchester United, and they didn't have some of, should we say, the owner related benefits of Chelsea and Manchester City, but they were independently successful as being seen as the biggest club in London. Failure to qualify for the Champions League for so many years was not good. And we saw the commercial income flatlining, and we saw the TV money starting to sort of flatline as well. And that meant that Arsenal was starting to become adrift. So re-engagement with the Champions League is good. Being in this year, you've got the Swiss format. Excellent news. One guaranteed additional home game, but there's far more prize money. And getting in the top four has never been more important than it is this season. Arsenal have. I think they've needed their arses kicking. Now, I'm a university lecturer. That's a technical phrase I would use. Um, and they've sort of just assumed that that more money was going to come in from sponsors just because they're Arsenal. Well, sponsors want Champions League football, so we saw a significant increase in that. So that's all the good news. An extra 150 million pounds coming through the door. What we're going to spend it on? Well, Arsenal have also spent an extra 150 million pounds on player costs in the year. So the wage bill went up by 40%. And as you rightly said, some big ticket signings coming in and renegotiated contracts for players, and the fact that the bonuses kick in for qualifying for Champions League. Players will often have 20 to 25% bonuses for getting to that particular point. So the money's gone straight out again. So that's why Arsenal have lost money. They did have some player sales last season. They made 50 million pounds of profit, which is good. And overall, I think the financial results, even though the club made a loss, it's not a loss to worry about. And if we then sort of look at it from a PSR point of view, they lost 18 million pounds, but your infrastructure costs were 17. Cost of running Arsenal's academy is a Cat 1. It's probably another 15 to 20 mil. So actually, from a PSR point of view, Arsenal made a profit last season.
Okay, well, which is fantastic news. Thank you for breaking that down, because a lot of this stuff comes out and you're going, well, 17.7 million, that's still a loss. Is that a bad thing? But as you've mentioned, more came in, but also more went out. I think, look, I want to cut to the meat of it, which is that Arsenal fans, they want to know, does this mean there is potential for something special come this summer? Because there was a lot of frustration again, and I'll say it at kind of surface level, that we got into the Champions League for a second year in a row, and we had, I think, a net spend of maybe -5, if I'm not mistaken, from the summer transfer window. January, there was a real need for forward additions. We didn't do it, and we kept hearing it was all about kind of keeping everything to go big for the summer, which to us sometimes feels like just in a way of appeasing us up until the big summer.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Arsenal are concerned, do they have the capacity to spend money? Yes, they do.
Yes.
So it's now a case of making sure that they spend it well. There are other clubs. There's other clubs in London who have not spent money well. And if you're putting 50, 60, 70 million pounds in for a single player, then they're going to expect wages to match that. And based on the spreadsheet I've got in front of me, the average weekly wage at Arsenal went from 112 to 157,000 pounds that year. So you're committing probably to players coming in expecting to be earning somewhere in the region of 7, 8, 9 million pounds. And that's a lot of money going out. And if you get it wrong, how many other clubs in European football are going to match those wages? So we've seen at Manchester United, where Manchester United have always been at sort of top dogs in terms of the money coming in because they've got a bigger stadium. But you've only got to look at their transfer spend, and I know we're not here to talk about them. Apart from Bruno Fernandes, can you name a single decent player that Manchester United have signed in the last 10 to 12 years? And yet they've got a net spend in that period of around about 1.5 billion pounds. So it's making sure you don't make mistakes. And I think this is the key thing, because if you do make a mistake, especially if you go down the Chelsea route of giving them 8-year contracts, you've got a 7-year headache on an 8-year contract when you sign the wrong players. So do they have the ability to spend? Yes. Do they have the resources? I think to a large extent that comes down to Stan Kroenke. Arsenal did borrow from the owner. I think they borrowed around about 80 mil last year, rather than go to banks, and therefore you can borrow at cheaper interest rates from the owner. That might change due to the Premier League's new rules, but the Premier League is such a mess at present. Nobody actually knows what the rules are when it comes to interest on loans.
Okay, it's really fascinating. And there's one bit I'm trying to remember it now that you just mentioned before about um, spending wisely. That was it. I found that really interesting because I look at clubs around us having wasted millions and millions, and for years and years they've gone again. Now maybe the financial climate's slightly different now. Maybe that's catching up to some clubs, but when we talk about, and I know this is going to upset some Arsenal fans, but when we talk about Kai Havertz, for example, our general feeling is whether he's been much better than people expect or not good enough, wherever side of the coin you land on, there was a very heavy investment in this player. £65 million is a transfer fee, and he's one of our highest paid players reportedly at the club. Now, okay, with that, you'd expect that kind of player to be a first team regular that you don't want to upgrade on, who is, keeping their shirt. But the reality is we're going to this summer saying we need to upgrade and get a striker in his position. Does it feel like Arsenal, for some reason, maybe more than others, feel like they can't afford to make a mistake? Like, we need to make a Kai Havertz work more than others, because I've seen 60, 70, 80 million pounds wasted at other clubs, but they're happy to sort of go again and replace that asset. And we're not even looking to replace Havertz. We're maybe just looking to readjust his kind of role in the squad a little bit. Do you get the impression that with Arsenal, it's a bigger waste, it's a bigger mistake to get wrong? And forget even Kai Havertz, just if that kind of outlay doesn't bring you the player you want, does it feel like there's kind of more pressure on Arsenal to get it right?
I'd have said 3 or 4 years ago that probably was the case because the club was going through a reset. It
Mm,
wasn't generating huge revenues in terms of the level that we're seeing these days. So I think the pressure is slightly off, but you still don't want to make an £80 million mistake just because you can, because otherwise you end up with an Anthony, a Sancho, a Mason Mount, a Donny Van de Beek. That's £250 million down the
yeah,
toilet as far as Manchester United are concerned, and eventually it will catch up with you. So I do think it's absolutely essential that they do their research and do their homework. And Arsenal are, I would say, quite a conservative club when it comes to signings.
yeah,
And
I
that will
think we are.
probably act in their benefit. Certainly, when I do the analytics, and I don't know anything about football, but I can just about add up in terms of financial issues. There are some clubs that are outperforming compared to their spend, and there are some clubs which are underperforming. Yeah, I would argue that Liverpool are actually overperforming, and that's because they are very, very thorough before they sign a player. And again, you try to
Yeah,
think of, have they signed many duffers in recent years? Even Manchester City, and I know there's no love loss between City and Arsenal, but and probably until last 2 years ago, everything that they signed players who you knew were around, but then you realise just how good they were when they came to City. It's a case of getting it right, and I, just because you can sign three players and you only need one and a half of them to come off doesn't mean that you should do it, because if you sign three players and they're all good, then in 2 years' time you might be able to sell one and get a further
yeah.
upgrade. So I think that's what the clubs are doing, and we're certainly seeing. I speak to data analytics companies. I've spoken to people like Ian Graham, who was sort of the head of research at Liverpool, and he's got a brilliant book on sort of the nerdy stuff, which is part of the game today, whether we like it or not.
No, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, the final question I was going to ask you before we let you go was, the Cronkies were mentioned there. How it sounds such a stupid question, I know, and I'm sorry, but I guess what I want to ask is how much impact can they have in terms of, okay, there's the revenues. We keep hearing in the media that Arsenal want to be self-sustaining to a point. Um, What are the Cronkies? When we say the Cronkies are allowing Arsenal to spend, what does that mean? Is it that they literally have personal funds they're able to inject? You mentioned borrowing from them rather than borrowing from banks. How much can they allow for that? Is that a question of ambition, whether they want to allow for more or less? Is it making money available from within the club in another way? I think it's just understanding, because there's a lot of heat towards the Cronkies, which I've been a part of, when it comes to not doing enough on the spending front and not showing that ambition. But I guess what I want to understand is, what does that actually mean? How does that actually look?
Well, before the start of any season, the chief executive, the financial officer will sit down, and they will have a meeting with the owners of the club, and they say, "This is our budget." And that conversation, as far as season 25-26 is concerned, that conversation has already taken place. And that
Sure.
conversation will be, if Arsenal get to the semi-finals or the final or better of the Champions League, this is what we can spend. If we get knocked out in the round of 16, or this is what we can spend. We're assuming we're going to qualify for the Champions League. So they will have been through a series of what if scenarios. And then they'll look to the owner and say, well, this is what we'd want to spend. Are you willing to sign off on that? And it could be, we're going to need another £50 million of cash, because we've spoken about all the signings that Arsenal have made, but a lot of those signings have been made on credit. So then if I go into sort of the small print, as far as clubs are concerned, you've got a slight problem at Arsenal that you owe £250 million in unpaid transfer fees to potentially for Kai Havertz. You still owe some money to West Ham for Declan Rice, because most players are signed on instalments of 3 years or 4. So you've got some legacy issues. So we've got to remember, you've still got to go and pay those instalments before you can effectively sort of reset it. It's a bit like having a credit card. You can't go and buy yourself a new pair of trainers this week if you already owe a few grand on your credit card. You've got to get that down first. So that will be a meeting with the Cronkies, and then they might say, well, because of all this cash going out, we're 50 or 60 million pounds short. For them, that's small beer. For them, that's a complete non-issue. They certainly have those liquid funds available, and it's then a case of can they be persuaded, or are they willing? Do they want Arsenal to be competing at the top table? And if so, then they'll sign off on that as a budget.
Okay, Kieran, you've been fantastic. Thank you very, very much. If I were to just ask you in a line, do you expect Arsenal to have an expensive summer transfer window based on sort of some of the numbers we're seeing? What would your prediction be?
They
I know it's a big
can.
question. They can.
They can have an expensive window. It's
That's
then
good.
down to, are the right players available at the right price?
Yeah.
Do they fit in with the culture of Arsenal? And is Silent Stan just going to say one word, and that one word is yes?
Fantastic. Kieran, you've been great. Everyone, please go check out Kieran's podcast, The Price of Football. And of course, you've got your book as well, Kieran. And just a big thank you for joining us, because like I said, I can read all these numbers and I can get a sense whether it sounds good or not. But to have it broken down really, really helps. So thank you, Kieran.
Thanks for the invite, and have a great rest of the season.
Thank you very much. And of course, you're a Brighton fan. So, well, apart from the 4 points that we've lost to you guys, I wish you the very best for the rest of the season.
Ben
as
White,
well.
Leandro Trossard. It's in Brighton's interest for you to win the Champions League this season, because we've got add-ons if that takes place. So we're rooting for you.
Well, we'll happily pay them. I tell you what, we'll happily pay them if it needs
most
to be
kind. Thank you,
Kieran. Thank you very much. Catch you soon. There we go.